Hey, welcome back to day 19, and we are moving along. We're almost done with the strategy phase, but before we do, we got to launch the strategy, right? So we've taken a lot of time to create a great strategy. We first started with figuring out what strategy are we going to develop. Is it a marketing strategy? Is it a human resources, like a hiring strategy? Is it a pricing strategy? Long story short is we've decided what strategy we're going to create. We gathered a great team. We've set all the parameters, all the rules, how we're going to go by. And now it's really important to launch. All right, so we would have set the time frame and launched the strategy. Now, I just kind of want to make a few points because it's really important is we have to make sure we know when to make adjustments. And like I said in the last meeting, we really need to know what defines success and what defines failure. So if the thing is moving along really, really well and we know it's successful, there's really not any reason to make any adjustments. But if we start to decline, we're going to have to get in and fix that. Now, there are a lot of moving parts, and I've drawn out one right here on my whiteboard table. And I want to make a few points about that because the critical thing for this video today is really we need to measure everything. We need to absolutely, once we lay out the strategy, we know all the parts and the pieces, we know the moving parts. We need to measure whether it's working or not. And you know what? There could be one part of the puzzle that is kind of broken or needs just a little bit of tweaking, and it could make the whole thing hum like crazy. So I want to start with, this is really an example of a marketing strategy and the back end of a sales strategy, right? So marketing and sales are often in larger companies, they're different departments. They're run by different people. And of course they merge together and they converge with the problem. But marketing and sales is often different. I don't want to make a big deal about that. However, I want to show you how it kind of works when you get a group of people together of both marketing and sales and operations. You know, this is how it has. So I'm going to stick with this example of a marketing strategy, and I want to go through it with you. I've already drawn it out because sometimes when I start drawing on a whiteboard on this, I get all excited and it's not clean. So I wanted to make this as clean as possible. So let's start right here in this marketing strategy phase. We may have a Facebook page. We may have a LinkedIn page. We may have a YouTube channel, and we may have a podcast. Well, all of these are going to lead to what we hope to end up selling. But if somebody were to ask you, hey, what's your marketing strategy? Well, it's a podcast with some social media to push it to. So let's use our strategy. Let's move them to a registration page where they would maybe watch a video and put their name and email in it and register. And of course, you've been in these email marketing campaigns. It fires off an email and it's leading you to a webinar. Now that really is where it transfers into a sales strategy. But you know, they also have follow-up emails just to get you there, and they're all pointing to the webinar. So once somebody arrives at your webinar, you know that it's going to fire off an email to remind them to go. And then once they appear at the webinar, they're going to go to the offer. Everything from here is going to drive them to an offer. Most of the time, they do a replay, and then there are a lot of follow-up emails that go, and they're all pushing you to the offer. That this is what we're selling. However, on most campaigns, if you don't want to take them up on the offer, they'll usually send you to a downsell. And if you take them up on the offer, you know how it is. Often they'll put you in some kind of upsell. So if you love this, you're gonna love this. And each one of these has an email campaign associated with it. So this is what the point that I really want to make. Measure everything. So if you have a Facebook ad that's driving to a registration page, you can measure the Facebook ad. Is it driving the amount of leads that we want to generate. And the same goes with your email and your YouTube. You can look at the downloads, but you probably aren't going to be selling here, but you're going to be building up your social media from here. You can also do an ad from your podcast and drive them to your webinar, and it's a great idea, but that's normally how it's done. Your registration page, you know how many people are going, you know how many people are in there, so what is your conversion rate? And you could figure that out. When they're getting the email, you can measure whether they're opening it or not, or clicking on it or not. And so it's important to measure all of these. You're going to have a closure rate on your webinar, hopefully, and that's much lower than anybody ever thinks. But you can measure whether your webinar is effective, and you'll see that sometimes your replay outsells your webinar, because we often put a timeline on this, and the closer somebody can get to the timeline, that's when they'll take you up on the offer. Well, you definitely know whether the offer, you can measure that. My point is, you can measure everything. You can measure every single email. You can measure whether the webinar works. You can measure whether the ads are working, and it's important to do it. So now that we have launched our strategy, it really is critical to measure everything and go back and look and see if you can optimize any of those conversion points. And that's when you really focus on that one thing, make a proper adjustment, and just launch it again, and make sure that it's improving. Tomorrow, we're getting really close to wrapping up the strategy phase before we move into action. Until then, I just wanted to thank you for being here, and thank you for helping me maximize my quarantine.